Hey, good afternoon. Little midday sesh here just to kind of bring things up. I got an idea on a couple things and I wanted to kind of clean up from yesterday. So welcome to Mass Transit. This season of Mass Transit is all about the state machine. So a lot of stuff going on there. We have a sample. Previous episodes have linked to it. It's called Sample Library. It's on the Mass Transit GitHub. So I've been trying to commit the code as a commit for each episode so that you can roll back in the history and kind of keep up based on the episodes that you watch. So, hopefully that is working well for everyone. When we left off, we had added the book checked out event, but I wanted to kind of look at a couple of other things within the book state machine to kind of clean it up and add some additional unit tests, and also to put a little idempotency into our service, to use a big word. So anyway, let's take and kind of go into this first. I've brought up the book state machine. And the book state machine, we can see that when a book is available, if a reservation is requested, we just go ahead and reserve the book. But we don't handle that reservation requested in any other states. Well, because messaging can be weird and there can be certain cases where you might get a message more than once, I could theoretically get the reservation requested event in the reserved state, like if the message was delivered twice. So to handle that, I should be able to come in back into the state machine and act as if the book was reserved the second time and essentially repeat that behavior. So one of the things I'm going to do is something that I've done similar in the state machine is I'm going to add another state in here. I'm going to say during reserved. So while the book is reserved, when reservation requested. And here what I'm going to do is I can't just assume that it's the same request. And this is where I'm not sure I have enough information in the book to track the reservation. So we're going to have to do this in a couple of different steps. We're going to have to add some data to the book because we currently don't keep track of which reservation has the book. And we're going to need that also for the book checked out as well, so we can do some eventing later. But assuming that in reserved, I want to publish that same event, the trick that I used here, I'm going to, in the reservation state machine for the publish, I'm going to also use in my book state machine. So I'm going to put a message on here. I'm going to replace this with book. Publish book reserved, I think is what it's called. That's what it's called. Yeah, book reserved. I'm gonna take this publish code and just put it in so that I can use it in two different places a little easier. The event type is, what's the event type? Reservation requested is reservation requested. So I will instead put this here instead of T because it's the same message type. I'll take that out. And what all this is going to do is I'm going to say publish book reserved. Yeah. And this is going to allow me to eliminate this single method here with just a simple call to publish book reserved. Just going to clean up the state machine, make the actual state logic smarter, but also allow me to publish that same event within the other handler. So just like during available, when the reservation is requested, I'm going to publish book reserved. Here, I'm going to publish the same event. And there's a couple reasons we do this. Even though we're already in the state, we receive the message again. There are cases where this could just be a duplicate message, in which case it doesn't hurt to repeat ourselves. But also, if we're using the in-memory outbox and the whole episode in previous season on Trashlantis and how the outbox works, if I receive this message again, it's fair to assume that the events did not go out and were not published by the previous attempt to handle this message. So I want to reproduce those events, which in this case is to publish that event again. So I'm going to publish that book reserved, but I don't need to transition to reserved because I'm already there. So that should take care of that case where the message replay happens. The other thing that the other thing that this kind of introduces is right now, this could be a different reservation. Two people could have tried to reserve the book at the same time, and the book can only be reserved by one person at a time. So there are a couple of things I could do here. I could say that if this is a different reservation, produce an event saying that the reservation was not accepted. But to do that, I still have to know what the reservation is. And because I'm not currently tracking the reservation ID, I'm going to need to add that. So I'm going to go to the book model. And again, this is kind of a refactoring episode and really handling edge cases and kind of looking at the things. And at the same time, we're going to be using some state machine features that let us do some decisions based on that data. Now, I'm not going to go into like third normal form database modeling and all that stuff and saying, oh, well, I should have a book reservation that is a foreign key to reservation and book and that it has a state. Well, you know, that's great. Have fun with that. This is an instance of a book, and I'm putting it in here for this purpose. So when the book goes into a reserved state, I'm going to have a public GUID of, and it's optional because a book may not be reserved, and I'm going to call that the reservation ID. One of these days, I'm going to realize that I should have never picked these crazy long terms. But hey, it's the domain we have. So now within the state machine, when a reservation is requested, I'm going to publish the book as reserved. But in addition to that, I am also going to set the context.instance.reservation ID equal to the incoming message, which is always in context.data, the same reservation ID. And the reason I do that is because I want to save that value. Great. So I only have to do this here. And so here's a little clarifying piece of information. With public book reserved and publish book reserved here, I always want to publish that event. But the actual copying of the data to the state machine instance, the only way that I would be in the reserved state is if I had actually saved this data. So I don't have to duplicate the then method because I know for a fact that if I'm in the reserved state, that the data has been copied with it. So it's all good there. There's nothing to really stress about there. Awesome. So now we have the reservation ID. When we publish the event, everything's rocking. And I think we should probably just do a quick cursory run of all of our unit tests to make sure everything is good. So we'll go ahead and run all those. Okay, all of our unit tests still pass, even though we changed some code, so that's good. The next case I want to look at is I need to make it so that when the reservation is requested from a different member, such as like a different reservation, but the book is already reserved, that we don't accept that second reservation. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to the reservation state machine tests. And we have quite a few tests in here. You know, we could probably break these up, but so far it seems to be working okay. When the book is checked out, that was another one there. That was when the reservation is canceled. That's with a custom duration. Sorry, I'm just kind of scanning through these. That's the reservation expires. Okay, when a book reservation is requested for an available book, we want to verify that the book is reserved. So let's start with this as a baseline. We'll go down here to the bottom and add that. And what our next test is going to do is say, when a reservation for an already reserved book is requested, should not reserve the book. Okay, and that's the case that we want to create now, is that if someone comes in for a book that's already been requested, then we want to get that into the, we want to make sure that we don't keep that reservation. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to copy that behavior and verify that the reservation is there. And then we are going to create a new reservation And I don't need to test this consumed and everything there. I don't need to test all that. I just want to make sure that the sagas are all there and that they have the appropriate states. What did I do? I didn't cut and paste the right thing is what I didn't do. Okay. So now I'm going to actually request a second book. So we're going to have second reservation ID equals newid.nextGrid. We are going to use that for our next reservation. We'll go ahead and put a different member ID in here. I don't really care what the ID is because we're going to key everything off that reservation ID, but we're going to try to reserve that book again with a different reservation ID. And in this particular case, we want to verify that the state machine comes into the area of reservation that did not exist. We want to get contains in state. We want to verify that the saga goes into the reservation requested state, the requested state. And it looks like we're actually asserting the same thing here. So that's interesting. Second reservation ID is in requested. So if we run this unit test, what we should see is that we've created a second reservation while the first reservation already exists. And from the amount of time it's taking, I'm going to say that it isn't going to do what I thought it would do. So clearly something's broken, which is fine. And I think I know why, because it's currently not checking when the reservation is requested to see if the reservation is actually matching the reservation ID. So if I look at where it broke, it was in the second reservation. The second reservation did not exist. And if we look at the logs here, we can see that we had the initial book reserved, and then we have the, am I doing some time stuff here? No. But I waited for a long time. Great. Scheduled acquisition. Look in here, trying to see what's going on. We scheduled the message. We sent the reservation expired for schedule message. We completed the reservation. We got the book reserved. I think we got 2 book reserves because we created and added, and we created and added, and then we used. Okay, so the issue that we have now is that we have to go and change that state machine so that it actually works the way we expect it to. Because right now what's happening is the book state machine is always taking that reservation and saying, yeah, it was requested, so I'm just going to publish that it was reserved. But the publish reserved uses the data reservation ID from the message, which is going to always advance that state machine to the reserved status, which is not the case here. So what we're going to do is we're going to put a conditional in this second statement. So when the book is reserved, I'm sorry, this one up here. So when the book reservation is requested, we are going to say if else, because we want to do 2 different things. And my guess is if else async. No, if else. And the condition that we want to check is based on our context. If context.instance.reservationID.hasValue and context.instance.reservationID.value equals context.data.reservationID. And so what we're checking is if the reservation ID is the same, we are going to publish that book reserved event. Otherwise, we're going to have to publish something else, or just not publish because the reservation actually isn't available for that book. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a yes, that's great. Don't do that for me. We are going to say if true dot publish book reserved. And I'm trying to think what my better name for that example is. Sometimes left, sometimes right. It's an if-else expression. I don't know. But our else, if false, I don't know. If false, we don't really have anything there right now because we haven't created another event yet. But we only want to publish that event if it matches. And so that's letting us put an if condition in our statement. So now if I run that unit test, this should pass because it shouldn't actually advance that state machine state because it's going to be stuck in that reserved status. The other thing that we could do is we could change it so that the reservation for that exact book, because it's requested, but we could put it into the reservation not available. We could create a different event that would be produced in the case of it not being available. That's one thing we could do. But right now what we're doing is if a reservation is requested and it's in the reserve or checked out, if it's in the checked out state, we aren't publishing anything. So right now all we're doing is publishing if that matches, which makes that test pass. And I think that's okay, because I think if the book is returned, that's when we would probably want to put some business logic to say, okay, who's the next person who's reserved that book, and do some logic there to allow that reservation to follow out. But we're not going to dig into that right now. So now I've put an if condition. Now I actually don't need the else, so I'm just going to do an if. And I'm going to get rid of the else condition since I'm not using it. I'm just going to rename this to something silly. Okay, so now I have an if. It's all there. I already know I'm in the reserved state. So now all of these tests should pass because all I did was add that single one to it. Okay, great. So that was one thing I wanted to clean up, is being able to handle that message if it came in a different state. When a book is checked out in the available or reserved state, the book checked out was another thing that I wanted to verify. And I think the reason I did that is because even if it was reserved, I was going to clear that out. And so now that I'm tracking a reservation ID, I need to also clear it out. Context.instance.reservation ID equals default. And I want to clear that reservation ID because if they've checked it out, that if it is reserved, that reservation would go away. Of course, I probably need to produce an event saying that that was no longer there. Yeah, that's something I'll have to think about because I would probably want to publish something for that book being checked out. Because I don't necessarily know that they used the reservation. They probably pulled it off the shelf and went and scanned it. And again, that's probably getting a little too deep into that. All right, so what I've done so far is I've done a little cleanup on the book. I've looked at the state machine. There was one other piece that I wanted to cover. Oh, yeah. And I'm probably going to break the episode on that because I don't want to go into injecting dependencies into a state machine yet, because I don't want to do that in the middle of an episode. I want to kind of keep them broken out so that I can refer to them in the docs later on of saying, here's how you do that. But that's a simple if check in the state machine and how to handle that same event if it's played back. So that's what I wanted to cover in this particular one. I want to look at the book. I want to look at the reservation state machine one more time because I want to make sure that I covered the case. So during reserved, so when it's requested, if book reserved, then we take the timestamp, we schedule the message, and we transition to reserved. I'm not handling the book reserved state if I'm still in the reserved state. So if I get a message playback here, then I don't need to save the timestamp because I know it's already there. I will need to schedule the message because that's a message going out. And I won't need to transition. So And the interesting thing about this is even if I've scheduled the message, it will basically just schedule it again. And the scheduler will know, since it has the same identifier, that that message is the same and will just update the scheduled time. So it shouldn't have any negative effects there. That was the other piece that I wanted to check. I also don't handle reservation requested in here. So I should do reservation requested, and I can ignore it. Actually, I can just totally ignore it because it doesn't matter. I mean, I accept it, but I just ignore it because there isn't anything for me to do because I would have already copied the data in transition to requested. So that's good. The other case is, yeah, I think that's good. Just like we had the initial when reservation expired finalize. We also have and we could have handled this a different way, but I'll cover that in another episode. We have the context, we have this, we have the scheduling for requested. If we get a reservation requested in here, we're ignoring it. The other trick is, would we have anything out of order here? Because again, this book reserved event is being produced without us asking the book to reserve itself. So in theory, we could get these in a separate order. That might be interesting to cover as well. So right now with the requested, we do the reservation requested, and we just happen to be getting that event at the same time. If there was some issue where this consumer was running slow, or for some reason the messages were kind of out of order, we might get the book reserved event in the initial state. And if that's the case, we would want to schedule the expiration because right now we're only doing it in book requested. So if we got book reserved in here, which we could because messages can arrive out of order, when the book is reserved, we would set the reserve timestamp. I don't know what other data we have. We would have to check. Let's put this into a statement. Let's see if any of these other things are here. Okay, so they are. So if we had the book reserved event and we get that in the initial state, we would have all the same values plus the reservation timestamp as well. We would be creating it right now, so that's fine. We would also schedule the expiration and transition to reserved. And so that gets that ordering issue out of the way. And if we run all the tests again, they should all still run. I'm trying to think how we could force messages to arrive out of order. That's kind of the tricky one, is messaging ordering is kind of weird. But that gives us that as well. And we could copy that over and kind of normalize that out into a statement at the bottom, but I'm not going to do that for right now, just to kind of show that. So now we've handled the out of order messaging use case as well for the state machine for the reservation. If we get requested, we get book reserved. If we're in reserved, now if we get reservation requested, when reservation requested, we would just ignore that now because we already have the reservation. We would ignore that. The only thing in the initial state is we would want is the reservation expired. So during reserved, if book is checked out. Why did I put two of these? Seems kind of weird to have two of these. During reserved. Seems like I should just combine these into a single case. When the book is checked out, if the reservation cancellation requested, if the reservation is expired, and if we ignore the reservation requested. And we could put this down at the end just to kind of clean it up. Just put the ignores at the end. We could do the same thing here. Oh, Resharper, I love you. Or writer, whatever. The fact that I could reorder the statement and it kept that, that's pretty legit. So, okay, let me run all the tests again since I made some changes. Okay, so that was just kind of a few tweaks on there, a little refactoring on the state machines. I'll make a commit for this and push it up. I may knock another 1 or 2 of these out today. I got a couple different ideas I want to cover, so it might be worth getting a couple more episodes out there as I work through some of these use cases. I will get to the checkout state machine. I'm just trying to think how that makes sense, and I want to cover some of the things like getting configuration into a state machine, and then I want to cover creating a custom activity, and I'll probably do that as part of the checkout state machine. So how we can actually create a custom activity that has dependencies that gets resolved through the container that we can actually test in our unit tests. So thanks for tuning in. I'll probably be doing one here again shortly, so stay tuned and I'll be back in a bit. Thanks all.